Hello and welcome, I'm Tafara Gadamo. Where is the Ethiopian economy headed as we go through this transition? And what are the issues that are being sorted out? My guest today, Professor Fantu Cheru, co-editor of the acclaimed The Oxford Handbook of the Ethiopian Economy, published last year, has been closely following developments in this country. Professor Fantu, a very warm welcome to the program.
Very happy to be with you.
So we find ourselves in a very interesting political and economic transition in this country. I mean, for the last 2+ years, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Ethiopia is never a dull moment here. It's every day, the transitions, there are multiple transitions taking place at a multiplicity of places by a multiplicity of actors. So it's quite a dynamic, but also very challenging time, to, if I may say so.
You were here in Ethiopia, actually, for one of the big seminars that we had here in Bishoftu on nation building in Ethiopia, or the exercise of it. So you know the prelude to the whole transition that we are in now. And you are here in and out of the country observing as we go through this tumultuous and sometimes very peaceful transition. Is there any reason for hope? Yes, certainly there is.
Oh, definitely. The time we met Bishoftu was 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and where we are right now, that workshop, I left the country very depressed. I thought we were on the verge of total collapse, but things quickly changed after April 2018, and a lot has been done, but a lot remains to be changed, to be done yet. There are challenging issues. So given the history of this country where we come from, we can only hope, but also at the same time recognize some of the challenges that are ahead of us.
For our discussion this evening, I'd like us to focus on basically the economy. Not a rosy picture always in Ethiopia. There's always moves forward, and there are also big dips that we stumble into. I mean, it's always a two side to it.
Exactly. I mean, these are, on one hand, there is a clear evidence that we need to move into a different direction. That doesn't mean we forget the achievements of EPRDF also on the economic front.
So what do you say is we don't need a marked departure from the past?
No,
some continuity.
We do. Some things have to continue. We have to be very pragmatic. You simply do not throw the baby with the bathwater. There has been achievement in the economic area with some troubles. On the other hand, there is also a need to move into a market direction. Delineate the role of the state, where are the areas the state should be involved. There should be areas where the market forces, private sector should become an important actor. The state should not be in the business of selling injera and shiro, but it can provide strategic guidance on the direction. So there are some policies that are long overdue, that in terms of liberalization, in terms of the opening up the market, the increasing the role of the private sector. So we have to be very clear not to go into the other direction. They need to understand, build up some of the better performing sectors of the economy, while at the same time also opening up other strategic sectors of the economy.
Which are the better performing corners of the economy, if you will?
I mean, there are, selective areas in the areas of the delivery of the state's role in the provision of infrastructure has been very critical. And the importance of infrastructure is to enable the private sector, for people to be able to get to the market, etc.
So you think that the government was effective in delivering those kinds of things?
In delivering those kind of things. In other areas, it should have stepped out of that business.
Like from what?
In the case of, for example, here again with some qualification, it's the case of, for example, say the telecom sector, which is a debate. I'm not completely in favor of complete 100% privatization. We need to look into the production chain of the telecom sector and see where are the areas of inefficiency in that production chain. That may be the subject of privatization, not the whole asset. So
But that's what they are looking at as they in their new economic policy now running.
Well, I think there tend to be, complete privatization, I think it has to be evidence-based. We need to look at the entire sector of telecom and say, this is a sector that's doing very well, but here, it's not working here. This may be subject to public-private partnership or complete privatization. So let's not be in a rush to simply sell assets off without doing the empirical evidence and identify where are the sources of inefficiency in a particular sector.
What else?
Take the case of Ethiopian Airlines also, which is supposed to be successful in many ways, and it is successful. But believe me, there are areas of Ethiopian Airlines which I would put for privatization. Ground services, for example. It could be food services. So what I'm saying is let's look into what are the sectors that are not performing well, where the private sector can do well. So I caution the need to look into the entire production chain rather being in a hurry to sell off important assets such as Ethiopian Airlines or Ethio Telecom.
Why are we in a hurry, you think?
I think part of the driving force, from my understanding, is the foreign exchange crisis. Selling off is not going to deal. The foreign exchange crisis is really a structural crisis. It's about a production crisis that we are not able to produce, etc. So it's the short-term crisis of foreign exchange that's driving the rush to privatization rather than looking into the structural bottlenecks, the structural problems in the production sector across all the sectors of the economy. So I have a feeling that we are too much in a rush because this short-term crisis of foreign exchange rather than looking at the entire structural crisis that are embedded in the economy as the point.
Well, why do you think it's a short term? As far as I can remember, this forex crunch has been there for many years.
For many years, exactly. Definitely one of it, the crisis has been, productions has been. If you look into agriculture, if you look into other sectors, you need to invest the productive sectors of the economy. Look at it, export about close to $2 billion, import up to $17 billion. There's no way that you can, unless you raise the productive capacities, the peasantry, the service sector, a variety of areas. So the production side has to be given more emphasis rather than, that's in the long term, that's how we will be able to overcome the forex crisis in general.
Yeah, in order to be able to lift up production in this country, you need to finance it. Where would that money come from to finance your development?
Exactly.
And that's what exactly the government is doing now.
It's trying to do that. But, a lot of it is, the need for the policy reform, as I say, some of it is long overdue. In fact, some of the policies that are in the package and this homegrown economic policy has been part of the GTP2 process. But it was never implemented under GTP2 because the state was basically, captured after 2012. So important forces basically were not willing to seize the implementation of these long overdue policy reforms. So in that sense, there are in the package policies that should have been implemented post 2014, 2013 period of time.
What do you mean? That's a side issue, actually. But what do you mean captured? Because there was no one leading this country? What is it?
The state captured.
We were in perpetual transition for at least 4 or 5 years?
Exactly. I think this is an area, the policies are the post-Mallas period, post-2012 period. The state was basically, by important actors within the party and others, has basically captured the key institutions of the state. That means the policies that should have been implemented has been neglected because it undermines their own private interest. So the state, I think, post-2012, I would say, has been captured, unable or redirected to serve the interest of very powerful forces, particularly within the party.
The new government, technically new government, quickly came up with what it called homegrown economic policy for Ethiopia. It said it came in the form of several PowerPoint presentations, and the website of the Prime Minister's office, it says, the homegrown economic reform agenda, a pathway to prosperity. What is it exactly? Why do we need to be told that it is homegrown, actually?
Well, definitely is to display a sense of national ownership of the policy process. In some respects, as I said, part of it is homegrown because it is a carryover from the previous government. On the other hand, given the significant amount of resources that are needed to pursue the reform, about close to $3 billion from the IMF, a similar amount from the World Bank, and then, of course, the bilaterals. Well, that creates, because those resources are not basically, Christmas gifts. They come with strict conditions, time-bound policies that have to be restricted. In the case of the World Bank, they have two types of conditionalities. One, what we call it, binding policies, or prior actions the government have to take before a single dime is really released. This is the areas of privatization, reforms that Parliament have to approve those legislations. These are prior action. The second is what we call non-binding policies. They are actually binding policies in terms of institutional reform, etc., that have to be taken into account. In the IMF case, also the same two set of conditions. One is what we call structural conditions that are institutional reform on fiscal policy, inflation, etc., as well as what we call it also quantitative conditionalities that the government have to, these are time-bound policies. If you violate to implement those policies, 6 months from now you should have X, Y, Z, implemented. If you fail to actually meet those objectives on goals, they basically tighten the screw. The conditionality become much more harder. So they require significant sacrifices. But these are policies that have to be done. But the question of how you sequence these policies, because it requires significant sacrifices on the part of the population. Have you put in place a social protection program to cushion the effect of this adjustment? So these become critical issues, but it takes time. There are sacrifices involved.
So the government basically started doing what the IMF, the conditionalities have already been met, haven't they? Or
we have yet to start.
You have to start, but you have made it clear that you're going in that direction, and that's why the IMF basically...
Because each of the resources are going to be released in tranches. That means when you meet a certain set of, the set time-bound criteria, resources are released, then you moved on to the next set of policies. So there is no way getting out of it.
So what you're saying is it can be, this package can be a manna from heaven as it can be a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. Because if you look into Chile, Argentina, this is, I've been involved in the Peruvian reform, the Russian reform of the early 90s and the Boris Yeltsin period.
Tell me about that, because I know you gave a talk on that at some point in the past.
If you look...
This goes back to close to 30 years ago.
Exactly.
The IMF came up with that package. Do it or you don't.
Yeah, I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen it all. And depend on so many conditions. But as I say, these are stricter, the conditionalities are clear. And how do you sequence it? You need to have a very effective bureaucracy to do it. There are no guarantees that you will succeed. But it's not only the macro policy, but the institutional setup to implement these policies. Do we have the bureaucracies, the institutions that can really implement them sequentially and at the same time also be able to protect the population, to cushion them from the effect of, because it requires the policies of tightening your belt for a while. That's a fact of life. We cannot escape it. How do we do it? Health program, education program will be affected. Electricity cost goes up, cost of water goes up, etc. So it is a period.
Because you are letting the market decide.
Exactly. So these are challenging times. So it requires, really the institutional apparatus have to be there in place, in sequence, to be able to implement it and get us out of the situation we are in.
So what you're saying is we don't have the institutional setup. To carry on with this.
At the macro level, we're good in good policy thinking, but we're not good in the institutional aspect in terms of implementation. This is, of course, a bureaucracy with a mindset from a very highly developmentalist regime. The corruption of the institutions across the board. So how do you get these policies in a timely fashion, coherently to be able to measure results and performance. These are critical challenges. We're not talking about the institutional challenge right now. The focus has been more at the macro level right now.
So when it translates into action, if it does, what we're going to see is quite a dislocation of sorts. It's across the board. Yeah. For example, if you're selling this key economic entities in this country, privatize them, definitely there will be massive layoffs and so on and so forth. And add to it that we have a high unemployment rate in this country, a fairly young population, and so on and so forth. You certainly would look forward to some kind of social safety net programs, which seem to suffer quite a lot in transitions like this when things are up for sale.
Exactly, particularly in this country where we are going multiple transition, economic transition and political transition simultaneously. This can also reinforce each other, or they can take you into different directions. So there's a multiple challenge for the government. So some of the economic challenges can become political challenges. Some of the political challenges can affect the directions of the economic policy. So I think what I'm saying is, let's be honest. There will be challenges, but at the same time, how can we cushion the population, from the effect of adjustment policies we are in? Because these resources, I'm glad the resources are being made available, but they are not for free. There are transaction costs involved. It also depends on not only the leadership on top, but also the effectiveness, the responsiveness of the public institutions, which at the end of the day are going to implement these policies.
So what do you see? I mean, the way forward. What do you see happening in the medium term and the long term as far as the economy is concerned? I think with all these kinds of pressures that we just raised coming from all directions.
I think what I would like to see from the government now is, this is a very comprehensive package, but I would like to have a phased approach to economic reform policy. My priority, for example, will be how to raise productivity of the peasant agriculture, most of the people. So that will be in my sequence. And then you go on in terms of institutional. So let's not take the entire thing at the same time. Let's have a phased approach. What are the key sectors of the economy we need to act very quickly that can really release the energy of the population to become productive, to provide jobs, etc., rather than basically looking to the broad macro policy. So the sequencing is going to be critical. And in that way, you will have a phased approach to economic reform rather than, what you call it, a scorched approach to economic policy.
Do you see that happening any time soon? Not just scorched,
no.
but the other way.
That's what I mean. As you said, we have only this 47 pages of slides, okay? I like to see, I was told...
It's homegrown economic policy.
Yeah, I would like to see the government begin to lay out on sectoral policies, the phased approach. I want the details of it. Maybe they are doing that now. So I'll still give them the benefit of the doubt until I see some of this report coming out. How are they going to do? What are the priority sectors? How do they set up the pathways to economic reform? That's not clear to me. Maybe they are working on it. Then I would be able to sort of do a more definitive judgment whether they are in the right direction or in the wrong direction.
Well, officials in government say or insist every time they appear and meet the media or give some kinds of presentation in some fora, they say we have no time.
Yeah, but that's not the way to go. Yeah, yes, everything in Ethiopia is urgent, but you also have to have a very clear pathways. Where are we going? Where do we want to be 10 years from now? I don't see that direction. So some kind of vision. In 10 years' time, we will be here. At the end of the reform, we hope to be in there. That long-term vision, I don't see it. So we're much more focused on the technical element of the policy reform rather than, a collective vision of what kind of society we want to be. A society that has increasingly become very, very unequal in a very short period of time. with 70% of the population under the age of 24, 25. This is a huge challenge. So what is our vision of job creation for young people? What is our vision on food security? What is our vision? All those things, I don't see the vision part for me. That way you can have the population to buy into the reform process.
So you think the conversation is not there on a number of layers, right?
It's not there. It's not there. Even for a more informed person like myself, I'm looking for it.